I always think this room is too big, too small. We've tried elsewhere. I think we've got the whole of DWP here today, have we? Right, welcome, thank you. We have a vote probably just before 10:02, so we'll see how it goes. And particularly thanks to the three of you for accepting the invitation to come here before us. Can I just explain how we do this? This committee holds officials, accounting officers, to account for value for money. We've introduced this new way where we bring in some of the people at the coalface first. Oh yeah, I'll do that. Allow you to go, people at the coalface first, to just give us an idea of what it's like for you, rather than just always hearing officials. So it's a very short session, usually try and get it in about half an hour, where it's an opportunity for you to say to us the issues that we should be thinking about as we try and evaluate at this very early stage, and we all know it's an early stage of the work programme, what the risks are and what the department should be thinking about to ensure that it's effective, it's efficient, and it's economic in the delivery of welfare to work. So that's the purpose of it. Meg just wants to declare an interest.
I need to declare, Chair, that I have a connected financial interest as husband of a non-executive director of Prospects, which is a prime contractor in one area for the work programme.
Good. So I'm going to give you the opportunity, really, just to say what you think in that context. Here we are at an early stage of a 5-year programme. Who would like to start? Geraldine, would you like to, is it throwing it a bit at you, but just what are the key issues that you think we should be thinking about as a value for money? We're not questioning policy, we're really looking at the value for money aspects.
Okay, well, I think for community links, we've been saying for a long time that the black box approach would be a better way to deliver into employment work. We've been saying that having a longer time to work with people who have the most complex problems would be a good thing. And we've been saying we would be completely ready for payment by results. We're confident about, being able to deliver that and our track record. So we think that the work programme is a good thing. Looking forward, there are two things that we would like to see that I think could make it even better. One is about differential payments. So at the moment, people are sent to us, we get paid on the basis of what type of benefit people are on. And people come with a whole range of problems. JSA, somebody very easy, somebody very difficult. Actually, the differential payment should be based on the level of need, the complexity of somebody's needs. So at some point in the system, what you need to do is a really, really good diagnosis of what those needs are.
So you mean rather than the category of claimant, the level of need? Yes,
absolutely. And we're not saying let's have a different payment for young people, for example, because some young people will be straightforward and some young people will be very complicated. So what we're saying is that initial diagnosis that says this person is going to be quite straightforward to work with, this person has 10 different problems and is going to require a lot of support over a long time. That's what the payment should be based on. And I think there's a huge opportunity with the introduction of universal credit about being able to do that diagnosis at that stage. So, at the point when we get rid of all the different types of benefits, let's do a really, really good diagnosis at the job centre, which identifies what kind of support, what level of support this person is going to need, and then let's get that support in really quickly. Let's not wait until they've been on benefits for 12 months.
There's 8 levels of support already. You used 8. Putting 6 fingers up, that's a mistake. 8 levels of are you saying there needs to be more granularity?
No, I'm not saying there should necessarily be more than 8 levels of support. We're saying that those levels of support shouldn't be determined by what benefit you're in.
It's not. The range is from 3,810 up to 13,720. It's not just on the basis of benefit.
It is.
If you look at figure 4 in the report, that's quite helpful on this.
It is. Well, just to move this on, unless what page is figure 4, Matt?
15.
Page 15, figure 4.
What is...
Can I just ask, are you asking it to be simpler or more complex? I'm not quite clear when you say...
Oh, I see what you
assess
mean.
it.
There are...
Because there's a simplicity about the model that can lead to problems in complex cases. But then identifying the complex cases can take more time and effort. So
I think what we're saying is people you know, people who get sent to us because they are on JSA, you know, there is, you know, there are a range of payments, aren't they, depending on how old they are or whether they're coming on a voluntary basis. But actually, within that, the range of support those people are going to need is very, very different, and the payment should reflect the support.
It does. It ranges from £3,700 to £13,720.
Yes,
Jackie, one of the issues, if you take Group 7 in Figure 4, which is described in Figure 3 as employment support allowance claimants who have recently moved from incapacity benefit, they're a very high value group. That group includes people who have been temporarily ill, who have a history of working, who were on the incapacity benefit when they were temporarily ill but having a history of working, now on ESA, relatively easy to get into work. It also includes the people who've never worked and have been signed off on incapacity benefit and then ESA. If we look at those two people, they are hugely different.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to come back, come back a bit to Ms. Blake. That's hence the question: do you think there should be more than 8 groups? And
No.
you said no.
No.
Okay, that's fine.
She does think that there should be more sensitive
Be defined differently is what you're saying.
It's too blunt. It's too blunt an instrument. I think that's what we're
You
saying.
had a second point, and then I was going to ask you some very... We are going to have to come back to this. These people before. What you said you had a second point. That was
Our
quite
second point is about transparency. So for us, as for anybody who's working in the work programme, prime contractors, subcontractors, transparency about referrals and transparency about performance is essential if any of us are going to be able to plan ahead and to look at what the trends are and to think about whether we're going to have to scale up or scale down, or, you know, whether what we're doing is working really well, whether there are other people we can learn from. And if we want to provide a service which is absolutely the best that we possibly can for the people we're providing it to, then we need to have a transparent system.
Can I just ask some very, very quick questions, because I didn't realise you were actually a subcontractor. Are you reaching the 40% in terms of putting people into work?
I don't think I'm actually allowed to tell you what our performance is. Is that right?
Under the terms of our contracts.
Well, URSA published something, and they're your trade association. They're the trade association.
Well, then in that case, I would respectfully ask you to speak to URSA. But in the confines of the contract that we have signed, we're unable to give you detailed information.
You're contractually prohibited from
That
stating
correct,
what your
sir.
performance is.
Yes.
Do you think that you'll hit the 40%?
How do you feel about it?
are you optimistic?
Community Links were the best performing provider on the New Deal for 7 years in the whole of London and the South East region. And we were hitting 27%.
Isn't tomorrow's people?
In London and the South East region. What the work programme does is it gives us longer to work with people, it enables us to take a black box approach to do whatever is needed. So I think, you know, I'm positive about our performance.
Are you getting... Can I ask you other questions of issues around... Are you getting enough ESA referrals?
No, they're coming through too slowly.
Okay. Third question, out of the £400 that is the attachment fee, can you tell us how much of that you get?
Ooh, no, but I
think you can, because I've been told in my own borough.
I'll find out for you.
Do you know?
No, I don't.
Chair.
We asked the same question to Scott. How's it going?
Well, can I just clarify, I'm here in my capacity as Chief Executive Tomorrow's People.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
How the work programme is going, like others, we're delighted with the black box approach. We've argued for it, gives us a flexibility to what we do. And we have ended up with 4 subcontracts around the country, all in very different areas, one of them in an area where the economy fares better, others where it's not so good. And at the moment, we're hitting the average figure, about 1 in, you know, we've got 20% in terms, 1 in 5 sort of getting
Are
to
you
our...
viable on that basis? Are you viable
Well,
over time?
When we
Is the
did
contract viable?
When we did our financial modelling on the business model, we didn't start on day one hitting where we needed to be. So we're building up. So what we would say to you right now is we are where we thought we would be at this point in time, and everybody's working very hard to ensure that we do hit the targets and do the best for the people we're in business to serve. And I think the issue is around employers. We're having to redouble our efforts to get to them. We're having, in some places, to convince them to give people opportunity. But thus far, well, we're not doing too badly.
And are you worried about if the economy, you know, given the programme was established in 2010 on very different sort of economic circumstances than what we are now, and likely to be looking at the Office for Budget Responsibility going forward, you're hitting 20% now. Given the economic circumstances, are you worried about the financial viability of your programme going forward? You know, if the economy stays, I know it's an if and a but on the OBR forecasts,
yes,
with a 32% increase in the number of referrals that are coming through to you now, not to you personally, but are going through into the system, what does that make you, your organisation feel?
If you look at the two things that keep us awake at night, it is around the economy and the ability to create jobs.
Yeah.
And, you know, that is, I can't argue with you on that one. And the other one is that for the sector that I represent, I think the other issue, we can do the job, you know, we're committed to people,
Yeah.
we're good with employers.
Yeah.
It is getting the working capital into the system to allow us to play our own full
And are
role.
you getting the 400, how much of the 400 quid are you getting as a...
We don't know.
We'd have to check that.
I'll come back to you. I'll come
What
back
do
and
you,
tell you.
do you know, I was told in my own borough, that's why, by the subcontractors. Do you know how much you're getting?
No, I don't, but I will come back to you with that.
Okay.
Yes.
Just ask, in my own borough, and one of my providers doesn't have a contractual relationship with the prime contractor, and they feel they could benefit by having the flexibility of not having that contractual relationship. You both have contractual relationships and are paid on, therefore, exactly on the performance.
Yes.
Does that... It's interesting because for the financial modelling for the third sector is very challenging because of the potential issue you raised, Baroness, Stedman-Scott.
Yeah.
So, I mean, are there other models that could work? How do you feel it's going on the contractual thing? Would there be other models that could work equally well, as they clearly are in some places?
Sorry, do you mean other where you're delivering into employment work without a work programme contract?
Without being actually having a contractual relationship with the prime provider, your deal's being done on individual clients, basically.
Spot purchasing.
Do
you like those ones? Right, yeah.
Yeah, I speak for most people. I like to have a contract. I like to know where I stand. I like to know what's expected of me, and I like to know for the prime to know what's expected of them. To not have a contract, it's then you're on spot purchasing. And if I've understood the situation correctly, that for a lot of people who've got the spot purchasing, their aspirations for referrals and business activity on the work programme haven't come forward. So I think having a contract is a good discipline, and it makes it easier to understand what you're both...
Just follow up on one of the issues that I come across often is the challenge of dealing with people, for instance, with mental health problems or with disabilities, but mental health problems is a particular interest. Do you deal with those groups? I'm sure you do. And how can you give any analysis how it's going so far with people who are more challenging to put in the workplace in the workplace, particularly?
We have the referrals that are starting to come through, the ESA referrals that are starting to come through, who are have been assessed as capable of working, for example. What we found is that the level of complexity has gone right up. You know, some of the people that we're working with are exceptionally difficult and a very, very long way from being able to join the labour market. And we are at the same time as we're providing workplace work programme support to them, we're probably also, our advice team is helping them launch an appeal against the assessment that they're fit to work in the first place. It does, the work that we've, on the New Deal programme, our staff are very, very used to challenging people, but there is a whole new level of complexity coming through at the moment.
Austin, I've got to come to Dan in a minute.
You're both charities, and I wonder if you're not going to be, or in danger of being, the fall guys of the system. I mean, you took on these contracts as subcontractors, on the basis of figures which were calculated at a time when the economy was thought to be doing better than it is. Now, the Audit Office has based its calculations of the success rate on more recent figures, which are gloomier. And it's still possible the economy might get still worse. Now, in that case, it's going to be difficult to reach the targets, which are going to trigger payments. So if that happens, who carries the can and who makes the profit if you do succeed?
It is, taking on these contracts is a huge risk for us. You know, so under the New Deal, Community Links was
Does that mean we could go bust?
It is a huge financial risk. It wouldn't break the organisation, but it is a huge financial risk. It's the biggest risk to us. You know, under New Deal, Community Links had a £5 million contract directly with the DWP. We were the best performing provider in London and the South East. When the work programme came in, we weren't big enough to be a prime provider, which we would have liked to have been. But, you know, as an organisation which gets more young people into work than any other provider in London and the South East, we didn't feel we could walk away from this. You know, we felt we had to be in this game.
Whatever the risk.
And, well, but obviously my finance director would say no, of course not, whatever the risk. But we've been planning for it for, you know, we could see this coming a long time ago, so we've been building the working capital to enable us to cash flow these contracts. But it is, you're absolutely right, it is the thing that keeps us awake at night.
And how about tomorrow's people?
Well, when we did our financial modelling at the time, we had a series of benchmarks that we applied to deciding whether or not to take the subcontracts. Based on our previous track record and based on the benchmarks that we set, we agreed a budget and a performance regime that we believed we could achieve. And as I said to you, we are where we thought we would be at this time.
But meanwhile, things are getting worse.
They are getting worse, you're quite right, and it makes the challenge all the more. But what I would say to you about going bust or anything like that, we have a very intense monthly review within our organisation, and I would not let tomorrow's people go under because the contract wasn't working or it was forecasted to do
Would you
more.
walk away?
I don't like the term walk away, actually, Chair, but what I would do is go and have some more robust conversations.
Try and get more money.
With the prime, because the economy affects everybody, not just the prime, it affects the sub as well.
Can I just ask, Ian wants to come in, can I just ask you, in the climate, when the old New Deals, there were many more public sector jobs around, and actually a lot of, I bet you, more than half of your placements were in the public sector, would be my guess. Probably, is that right?
I couldn't say for definite.
But I'm not that off.
No.
Okay. Now, public sector is sort of, you know, there aren't any public sector jobs going. They're cutting back. So you're forced into a much more fragmented private sector environment, which is in difficulty. What about that as a challenge?
I think what we've got in East London is you're right that jobs have gone in the public sector in East London. We're slightly buffered from the full impact of
because of the Olympics.
Because of the Olympics, but not so much the Olympics, because of Westfield and, you know, the new Siemens Green Enterprise Zone that's about to open, and, you know, the other stuff that comes around the Olympics. But they are very, very different types of jobs. So what we're seeing is a lot of very low-level retail, security, those kinds of jobs. And one of the things that concerns us about East London is you've got a lot of that low-level stuff, and then you've got some very, very high-level jobs, and what you don't have is pathways to move from one to the other.
Just building on what's just been said, the new Public Accounts Committee in 2010, the very first hearing we did, as Chair said, was pathways to work, and one of the messages from that was that there seemed to be a mismatch of risk and reward between the primes and the subcontractors, and we heard stories about subcontractors having, you know, a lot more problems when. It's the whistling. It's not me, is it? A lot of problems when the when things didn't go as well as expected. It was actually the subcontractors who seemed to lose. So, what would you say about the balance of risk and reward between yourselves and the primes? Because you know what the overall...
We'll have to answer very fast because we've got to go and vote, I'm afraid.
The risk in these contracts is high, and there is, for the subcontractor, Tier 1, let alone Tier 2, then the risk is great. That's why we have to manage our risk very carefully and to make sure we pinpoint the time if it happens, that we can do something
My
about
real
it.
question is, are the primes carrying as much of the risk as they should do? That's the real question, compared to yourselves.
Well, from what I understand, I think that we probably carry more risk than the primes do, but at the end of the day, there is financial risk and reputational risk. So I doubt these big primes will want things to go wrong. They'll want them to succeed because it will have such a major impact on their business. And we're not experiencing in the primes that we are dealing with any bad behaviour, a very open dialogue and an ability to tell them how it is.
The flip side of risk, the incentive.
Yes.
Which is what parent by results is meant to achieve.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Geraldine, do you want to just deal with that, because that's an important question.
Just also to say that you know, it's up to us to negotiate the relationship with our primes. You know, we have a very, very positive relationship with our prime contractor. Very, very good. Actually, the one of the voluntary sector primes, Careers Development Group, and I think it has been enormously positive. It has brought things to our ability to deliver, like the bespoke systems, like increased employee engagement. So, you know, there are benefits as well as.
Okay, let's go and vote. When we come back, it's first Fiona, and then Steve, and then we must hear from Dan, and we've got to keep things going, guys, if we can. Just because otherwise we'll keep the momentum going. And just tell us, from your take, from having looked at what's happening, where you think the risks are, where you think what's concerning you, any views you have that you think we should have regard to.
Okay. Just by way of introduction, I'm not a provider. I'm an expert on looking at equivalent systems in other kind of countries and other jurisdictions.
Like Australia?
In particular Australia, which is the country that's contracted out most of its public employment services and been doing it for now 4 or 5 major kind of contract revisions. So it's a good comparator, albeit a very different system. A couple of quick observations about the audit office asked me to kind of do a quick review, which is published alongside their own kind of report, and that also tried to kind of signal some of the other kinds of risks that may be involved. The first point I'd want to make about there's a set of risks which are to do with the immediate conjuncture we're at. That is, economic circumstances are very different, etc., etc. There are other risks to do with the nature of the design of these types of programs and how they work their way through over a longer term in terms of the contract delivery. The first thing I'd say is that whilst there are some risks involved for some voluntary organisations in this, some of the more significant risks, I think, lie around the treatment of individual service users going through the programme. And the evidence from other countries is that service users can get more or less better deals with either for-profit or non-profit organisations. The status of the organisation is not what determines the level of kind of service and the treatment that actually people receive. The issue here is, to me, one about even one of the issues I'm sure you're going to be talking to the department and afterwards, which is about the performance expectations and the projections, is that even on the department's own projections, the best part of 2/3 of the people going through this programme will not be getting jobs. So there's a question about how are they going to be treated, what's the kind of service levels they can expect, and how is it that providers will anticipate and deliver services knowing that that's a likely kind of outcome. In the jargon, it's called creaming and parking. How will providers decide who they're going to put their investment in and who they're going to work with more intensively, and then what is the circumstances and what is the position of those people who don't get those kind of level of services. The second issue I'd like to point out to people is that when you look at the evolution of these systems, particularly in Australia and the United States, one of the ways in which you get efficiency and one of the ways in which you drive up the performance of the systems is having a far fewer number of organisations delivering the programmes. What happens over a period of time is that winners emerge. The people who are best at doing this, who have the best procedures and the best systems, are the ones who win bigger contracts. And I think that rationalisation of supply chains is going to happen in the work programme. Now, that some of the risks may be exacerbated because of the circumstances we're in at the moment, but this is a process where ultimately there's going to be far fewer subcontractors and possibly prime contractors delivering this programme, maybe over the course of this initial contract. So there are two things: the level of risk to service users and supply chain rationalisation, and how do we stop this, stop safeguards that might actually stop those efficiency gains taking place.
That's the design issue. I would just, so how would you design it? I mean, what's the design change that you would put in place that would be better for service users, which is obviously the objective of the programme, and which would mitigate some of the risks that you see? What would you design differently?
The most immediate thing, and to some extent the contract's already been let and the decisions have actually been made, but the notion of the black box is one that actually it's only a black box until the prime contractor decides and designs their own service delivery, and then it becomes a pretty grey box because they've got procedures, requirements. One of the flexibilities they were given was in determining their own minimum service standards. If you look at the minimum service standards, they vary across prime providers. Yeah? In fact, the kind of publication with all the minimum service standards for the different primes can range from one prime which has about 8 sentences to another prime which has about 10 paragraphs. So these are very different minimum service standards. If you look at the equivalent system in Australia, there's one set of national minimum service standards.
And who lays those down?
The department.
Can I just ask you about creaming and parking? Because plainly, the structure of that chart there, with the sustainment payments starting on the right-hand side being the biggest chunk, is designed to counter creaming and parking. Yeah. From your previous experience, how successful is that type of structure? Does it have the desired effect in incentivising providers to avoid cherry picking?
Cherry picking takes place anyways. If we think about this, there's
there'll be some of that.
Yeah,
there'll be some
precisely.
of that, but
what's the kind of design features that actually enhance the kind of the coverage of the service and the number of people who are going to benefit from it? One of the things I would say to you about those kind of cohort kind of payment systems is the risk there is clearly you're going to get creaming and parking within the groups. There is a significant variation in characteristics within those groups, but equally you get that in an Australian system which has the kind of classification, granular kind of profiling that some people see as an answer to that. It doesn't necessarily kind of work like that in practice. To me, the kind of key thing is minimum service standards which ensure that providers can't be too predictive and can't ignore everybody. They have to deliver a level of service to people, and frankly they surprise themselves by the number of people and the types of people they can get into jobs who predictively you may not actually work with.
One more quick one. You said that whether the provider was a not-for-profit or a profit-making business wasn't the deciding factor. What is? Over time,
the efficiency, the ability of those organisations, they have their niche kind of places, right? There's clearly parts of Australia where for-profit organisations would not choose to operate, and choose not to operate. And it's in those niches that third sector organisations, in particular the non-secular, smaller community-based organisations, continue to thrive in the Australian systems.
How about cheating?
Cheating in terms of fraud, in terms of gaming, that's a constant risk in the systems. One of the things that the purchaser loses in these black box contracts is real insight into how the contracts work on the ground and how services are actually delivered. I've just been in Australia, and one of the things they invented to stop one particular type of gaming in terms of how the contracts were awarded became yet the latest bit of the system that got gamed, and one of the biggest gamers was a non-profit organisation that was actually delivering it. So one of the questions to ask about the non-profit sector is not just how many of them are going to be in there, but what is that non-profit set of organisations going to look like in 3 to 5 years' time? If it's like Australia, there'll be some non-profits that do very well. In Australia, it's faith-based organisations, the Salvation Army, Mission Australia. The non-profits that do very poorly are community-based, smaller, secular organisations.
Fiona?
Dan, I am interested in what you're saying about the fact that there are going to be winners and losers coming out of this. And if in Australia there have been clear winners and then a various class of people have lost, what advice can you give us about managing subcontractors who are going to stop being able to provide it so that we get good value for money for the taxpayer and particularly good value for the people who are being worked with by those subcontractors?
Well, one of the warnings to draw from the Australian system is that they have a shorter contract cycle every 3 years rather than 5 to 7 year contracts. That gives the purchaser greater opportunities to get rid of poorer providers in the first place, which is a useful kind of advantage of that kind of system. But one of the key things that I think we want to avoid is in Australia, because of their black box contracting, because of perverse incentives that were created in the system, the way the purchaser responded was frankly to re-regulate, to re-bureaucratise the system. And now it's incredibly prescriptive. Clients have to be seen at a certain kind of sequence of time, certain things have to be done in certain kinds of ways, and up to half of the money in the system is chewed up in administrative and process types of costs. Okay, let's anticipate that, but we need insight into client experience. One of the basic things they have in the Australian system, which I'm surprised we don't have in our system, is they have a follow-up survey. What happened to you when you were on the programme? What did you think of the programme?
Yeah.
How was your personal advisor? And that is then used 5, 6, 7 years on to be able to have a quality indicator of how each of the providers are doing, not just for the people who get jobs, but also for the people who may have had their lives improved, but ultimately just didn't get jobs as a result of the programme.
I had a question that I really wanted to ask Geraldine. It's just that I didn't want to go straight from your... which was, you were talking about placing people in Westfield. And I am quite interested, your prime contractor is a voluntary sector organisation. I'm quite interested in the situation that I'm observing in retail where people are being placed for free in retail operations for work experience. And in my view, that seems to be squeezing out permanent employment in relatively low-paid retail. I have noticed companies like Tesco making their standard contracts 4-hour contracts. WH Smith has a 0-hour contract policy. Primark, places like that. In my constituency, I have constituents who have worked in those places and who are not getting the hours of work that they used to have, which is obviously having very substantial follow-on impacts on tax credits and so on. Have you encountered this?
I'm not aware of us encountering this. I met actually this morning with the director at Westfield, and you know they have you know they had some targets for local employment which they've exceeded by 50%. They've done some great work with the businesses in those in Westfield about getting them. You know, how do we get those local people into jobs? How do we keep them in jobs?
Do you think the planning targets were very significant in this then?
Do I think the
planning targets, which were part of Westfield getting the planning permission, was significant?
I think they were significant. I think they, you know, actually they're probably too low.
Yeah,
they could have challenged themselves.
Did Westfield, because I've heard the same, did Westfield do any of this, taking people on, not paying them and calling it work experience?
Not as far as I know.
Because I've heard the same. Can I just ask Dan a question, then we'll go to Steve? It may be, you may not feel able to answer it, but given the changes in the economy since these contracts were first signed in 2010, and given the OBR projections on employment, do you think these contracts will remain viable over the period of the contract?
I think it's about risks in this. Equivalent kind of contracting periods and processes that have taken place in Australia have found that the providers, when they feel the squeeze, come back as a fairly effective lobby to the purchaser and will negotiate relaxations, sometimes more upfront funding, sometimes the ability to kind of recruit new groups and different groups into their kind of service delivery.
And perhaps do more cherry picking.
Yeah, well, I think the kind of issue to me is both about cherry picking, but also about it's here we may see a deterioration in service standards, because one of the ways of managing cash flow, let's not forget, you know, if there's more unemployed people coming into the system, the initial thing for providers is a bit more money coming in, because they're getting more attachment fees.
2 or 3 years.
For the next,
can I ask a point on that? Because one of the things I picked up on earlier was that, Blake, you said there's not enough you're not getting as many EMA through. ESA through.
There isn't such a thing as an EMA.
Quite so. Quite so. Another value for money change. But there's more coming through on. Are you finding there's more coming through on JSA, and therefore, in terms of cash flow up front, you're getting one replacing the other? Is that, or am I linking two threads wrongly?
Same attachment fee for both. So.
Right. Yeah, no, and I don't think there's necessarily a link between the two. I mean, I think our referral numbers are, as Debbie was saying earlier, within the spread of what we thought they were going to be.
Right. So they're broadly as expected, even if the mix is different.
Well, no, because the ESA you'll get more. If you place an ESA claimant in work, you will. I can't remember the figures, but it's very much. You get double. You get double as much.
Not necessarily.
Not if it's a Group 5.
If it's a Group 5, then it's less than a
get it
JSA.
quicker.
So
it depends on who it is. Okay.
But you get it quicker, and you get but you get the same attachment fee for both.
If I make a point, we are where we forecast to be in terms of performance for jobs, in terms of flows on. JSA, where we thought we'd be, ESA has been slower, but it's coming through.
Okay. Thanks.
Stephen, and then I think we try and move on to the main session, if people are happy.
Yeah, I fully agree with the point around gaming and also the risk around the industry coming back and lobbying for changes. What I didn't follow, Professor, is your desire for a top-down, national, one-size-fits-all set of standards. Because my understanding of this programme was that it's to encourage innovation, that some providers will go, that's not in itself a bad thing, and this is the committee representing value for money for the taxpayer, and whereas previously we had a scheme that was funding upfront schemes that then failed, by which time we had already paid the money, here we're paying for success. And the industry's paid £500 million or more than £500 million, which means it thinks that the risk is worth taking. So why are you seeking to move away from that and have some sort of mandated set of standards?
These are about minimum service standards, right? Yep. The requirement at the moment in the contracts is that each provider, prime provider, actually indicates what their own are. They're required to make them available to kind of the service user coming into the system, who then has rights of complaint, rights of appeal if they're not being given those standards. When I've spoken to providers, they quite like the idea of common minimum standards. These are minimum standards. You know, the innovation, the kind of add-ons, the flexibility still exists. But what you are doing is comparing like with like. How do you compare one prime provider who says they will see people regularly, another prime provider who says they will see them once every 4 weeks, another prime provider who says I see them every fortnight?
I'm not interested in the tick box of how often they see them. I'm interested in what the outcome is, whether it works. I mean, let me give you an analogy from a different area. You can have a tick box that says if you want to travel from Manchester to London, the horse must stop 10 times and be given half an hour each time to eat hay. And you might get another innovator that comes along and says, well, I fail those service standards because my horse doesn't stop at all. I've got a car and it drives from Manchester to London. Does it different, but it still has the outcome. It's actually a better outcome. What I'm interested in is seeing the providers innovate. And so what we should be looking at is the gaming around the outcomes, the changing of the outcomes, the phony jobs which aren't real outcomes, but how you get to those outcomes, whether it's by having a tick box that says someone turns up once a week, sits in the class, doesn't pay attention, but is there and therefore ticks the box. I think that's what was probably going wrong in the past. And what I want to see is much more rigour around the outcome, but much more flexibility around the journey to the outcome. Whereas you seem to be arguing against that, and I just want to understand why that is.
No, because then you have the other risk, which is the risk of parking. Okay, the experience in Australia in the first contracting round, the job network, was that when providers had clients for up to a year in their intensive assistance stream, outcome payments, service fees, what they found was that most people got jobs in the first 2 to 3 months when they were with the provider. The subsequent evaluation found that the experience of many of the other people who didn't get jobs was that they barely recalled seeing a provider in the following 8 to 9 months. Now, it's that issue about parking, as well as the creaming, which is clearly what you want, more creaming, more people into kind of jobs, but it's the experience of that other group, because what otherwise is to stop the provider saying at the inception of the programme, you're too difficult to place, I'm not working with you.
Because they get paid. They get paid.
But they're only anticipating getting paid on 36%.
There's different groups. There's the hard to reach, there's the middle tier, and there's the the easier tier, and you reward those differently. I
And
think,
remember,
again, that's what this programme's
Stephen,
driving at.
just remember
Different
one
rewards
thing,
depending
which
on...
in all these equations, that there's another cost to the public purse, that if that one person is never worked with, they take benefits
Sure,
forever
but that's,
and ever.
you incentivise that outcome because it's a harder to reach client, and the programme is incentivising harder to reach clients. I mean, that's in
we're actually
figure 4.
arguing about the design of the programme rather than about value for money.
Absolutely.
My question in terms of value for money and minimum service standards is there a way that customers can hold people to account? You know, everyone gets 400 quid on the basis of the minimum service standards. Is there a way that a user can actually hold someone to account when, if you look at Ingeus's minimum service standards, they promise a flexible service that's convenient and accessible, a personalised package of support, a professional careers academy. We'll keep in regular contact with you, ensure you can easily contact us. Other people say you will see people in measurable terms. And I wonder if what you're saying is that these service standards, while they could vary, should be able to be measured so that someone can know whether their provider is meeting them.
Two responses in the Australian system. One is that's what you test when you do the customer satisfaction surveys on a regular basis. And the second thing is there's a clear complaints process, ultimately going back to the department if you feel you've been poorly treated on not getting the minimum service standards, for example, not getting disabled access or things like that, that you can go back to the department with. There are such processes inside the work programme that they are far more opaque.
Okay, final question, Meg, and then we're going to move on. All right.
Well, on the Job Centre Plus assessment was late. You talked about the job assessment at Job Centre Plus stage to get more detail before someone's referred to the contractor and then it's on to you. If you could just explain exactly what you're asking there, because I'm still not quite clear what it is you want them to do. And would it save money? Is I suppose a simple question. And then no one's mentioned evaluation. Well, actually, Professor Finn just did a bit, but are you being evaluated as you go, or what is the evaluation process at the moment?
I think what you mentioned easy to help, not quite so easy to help, and really hard to help, and that's what I was saying right at the beginning, that this isn't about whether somebody's on JSA or ESA or has come off IB or whatever it is. Some people will be easy to help, and therefore, you know, if we make that assessment, if we assess people on that basis, and we do that diagnosis properly at the beginning, and and that's how we do the payments, then those hard to help people won't get parked because there is a much bigger payment for them. And that's not about who they are or whether they've just come out of prison or whether they're young or whether, you know, it is about what their actual problems are, and that's about doing a proper assessment with them. And it's right that it shouldn't be the contractors, the primes or the subcontractors who do that. It's right, it should be somebody in the job centre, I think, that does that.
Do you think the Job Centre Pluses are equipped for that?
We'd love them to be equipped for that. I think that's how you could improve this. I think that's how you would improve the service, is you would equip them to do that.
Good. We're going to bring this bit to... Is there... Oh.
As you go...
What I would say is we employ an internal auditor who goes around everywhere regularly to see that the client journey is as our, you know, as we say should be.
Best practice.
And the department has commissioned an evaluation. The department has commissioned an evaluation which has been undertaken by a consortium of research organisations and will be reporting it on a regular basis.
Are you in that consortium?
Yeah.
And you mean reporting publicly or to the department?
Once it's gone through the department.
The other one is that... so,
Just to include the kind of survey that you talked about.
There will be surveys of service users in there. There's 2 stages going in there, but it isn't the regular monitoring model that's both Australian.
Anything else before you go? Go on. Geraldine wants to say one more, or do you want to?
You go on.
Just that
Meg,
I think there is a tension between the kind of commercial environment that we're operating in and actually doing, you know, that transparency about what's working, who's doing this really well, you know, how do we get the best possible service for the service user. So I think that the more transparent those evaluation mechanisms can be, and the more that we are prepared to share what we're doing, the better. Yeah.
I have to say to you, I have a very clear view on this. It's public money, and if it's public money,
Yeah.
we ought to be able to follow the pound and see
Yeah.
that there's getting value for
So
it.
you would favour all these evaluations being published unvarnished,
Absolutely.
even if the department looks at them first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Professor Finn?
That's something the department should, they're the ones who hold the
I'm
contract.
not asking about the department's opinion, I'm asking about yours.
Well, I'm known as a fairly robust kind of contributor to these kinds of debates anyways, whether it's tied directly to the evaluation, which is
You
a
mean
contractual
nothing
kind
will
of
stop you saying what you think?
Exactly.
Jolly good.
I don't know what your contract says, but never mind.
One thing I would ask, and it reflects value for money and effectiveness, is that Transport for London and the DWP have an arrangement about
Yeah.
subsidised travel.
Yeah.
If you're on the work programme, that doesn't happen. So in your constituency, Chair, tomorrow's people have got a discretionary fund. 10 of people came and we gave them grants. 8 of them got jobs. 1 of them is about to get a job and 1 didn't. Without that innovation, it wouldn't have happened. If you can open that up to everybody, you'll get a better bang because more people are being worked.
Very good. But you always do very innovative stuff.
We do our best.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Brilliant. She's so good.